Welcome to the Remembering a Life podcast. I'm your host, Holly Ignatowski, and today we're talking about end-of-life doulas. When we hear the term doula, we probably most often think of a birth doula, someone who helps bring new life into the world. However, increasingly, doulas are also helping people through their final days. My guest today, Marggie Hatala, is one of approximately 400 certified end-of-life doulas in the United States. Marggie has been an end-of-life doula for 6 years, providing families with in-home end-of-life support prior to and throughout the dying experience. Welcome, Marggie, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for the chance to be here. I really appreciate it.
What a fascinating calling you have. As I said in the intro, we've all heard of a birth doula, someone who helps a woman give birth. What is an end-of-life doula? Can you give us more of a definition?
Sure. If you think of a birthing doula, they do not deliver the baby. That they're there to support the mother and the infant as the infant joins the world. Really, very much a holistic, spiritual kind of non-medical support. And an end-of-life doula does the same thing as that spirit prepares to leave the world. We offer non-medical, holistic, very deeply spiritual and emotional support for the person that is facing their end of life and all the intimate circle that supports them.
And is that the same thing as a death doula? I'm seeing lots of different definitions.
Sure. Same thing. There's another term called soul midwife. There are many different words. Each person chooses a definition that resonates best with them, but the public has their own reactions to the word death or end of life, and so you have to be able to, soften it at times.
You refer to yourself as a life doula, is that correct?
Yes, because, end of life today, unfortunately, really very often consists of the last few weeks of life when hospice is called in, and that is a very sacred time, and I'd love to be involved. But I find I want to walk with people long before then. As they start to age and start to falter a little bit and need support, as chronic illnesses start to create challenges that no longer have active treatment, and certainly as terminal diagnoses are adopted, that's when I like to get involved. So I walk with people all the way through those weeks, months, possibly years, and right up through the end of life.
When are clients typically contacting you? You mentioned obviously terminally ill patients. Does somebody, when they on their 90th birthday, do they, hey, I need some guidance as I head toward the end of my life, or are most of your clients terminally ill?
Well, it's a rare person that really recognizes it on their own. Most often for people, when we're talking about the natural aging and decline, it's the adult children or the family circle, the spouse that reaches out for some support for themselves and advice on how to help their loved one through this time. But definitely for the terminal disease, the best time is the minute that diagnosis comes. I did have someone reach out once. She said, I have stage 4 cancer. I am no way ready for hospice. I'm still working. But she said, I'm terrified. That to me is the perfect, time to reach out because we can walk along and help normalize the situation, do some explaining, guidance, advise. I'm not ever there to advise against any plan of care, but to help explain it, I am also a registered nurse and have been a hospice nurse for many years. So I bring that information with me, but only to help support the medical plan of care.
Right, and you mentioned you're a nurse. I noticed you are also a Reiki master and a holistic healer practitioner. Now, you mentioned that an end-of-life doula does not provide medical care, but do you use all of these skills as a life doula?
Absolutely. I do not provide medical care. However, I fully understand it and can help explain, reinforce, look at what the medical plan of care reads, what the family has been advised as far as symptom management, and suggest that maybe, let's take a look at your loved one here. Remember when the nurse said that these were the signs of discomfort and you should give some pain medication. Do you see anything here now that would indicate that and kind of point things out? And so it's guidance, but never ever to instruct or even really advise.
But a medical background, as you said, would be very helpful in this line of work. Is it a prerequisite for this line of work?
Not at all. No, not at all. There are people, it's really, at least for me and for most of the people that I have come in contact with that do this work, it's more of a deep spiritual calling for whatever reason. Very often after someone loses a loved one, has a really difficult loss in their own lives, something changes in us. Our heart opens and we understand the sacredness of that time and want to help others. And so whatever your background, I do always strongly recommend training and certification, though, because while many people have the gifts that they can offer, there are a lot of ethical and competency things that need to be addressed, too. So to take a training program and also the competency badge through the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance is really, really important.
Preparing for those last days includes a plan for how the dying space looks and feels. Can you explain what that means, the dying space?
Well, the dying space is everything from the room, the location that you want to take your last breaths and be cared for. It has to do with how you want to be handled with symptom management. Some people want to be medicated to comfort. Others want to be medicated to just enough that they don't in any way lose out on, interacting with the people in their lives. It also includes, do you like music? Do you like silence? Do you want the TV on? Do you want aromatherapy, or do scents bother you? The list goes on. But to me, it really is establishing that sacred space that will help you feel at peace and cared for in a way that will nourish you so that you can be the most fully alert and alive till the end, but also very attentive to your inner self and the preparation that goes on within us as we prepare to leave.
And Margie, at what point do these elements come into play? When is the music and the readings and the rituals? How do you know when it's the right time for that?
Well, I think it naturally happens with disease, the decline that happens. You want always to promote that environment as much as possible, always. If someone is still having friends visit and able to participate in life, but very much getting closer to the end, you can promote that same beautiful sacred space while they're up and around. But as they decline and they need to have a hospital bed and more bedside care, then it just naturally, goes into that next.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of anxiety with a terminal illness diagnosis. So you're processing that, you're processing all those emotions and feelings as the patient, and also the family members the same. So how do you guide patients and families? One of the big things would be to, I want to say all the things I need to say to my loved ones. Do you help patients and families get to that point?
Oh, absolutely. It just is absolutely something that happens. Again, as we face our end times, that opening happens within people where suddenly they recognize the need to resolve relationships, to ask forgiveness of others, to offer it to others. That's not something that I'm there to drive or to, but I can certainly hold a spiritual space that allows that to come forward and to promote it. But at the same time, phone calls to family members or old friends, letter writing. There are many, many ways to promote those deep conversations. And I also have clients that are family members, but their loved one does not wish to have a doula, but I can support the family members beautifully through it, separate from that experience too. So it just depends upon each situation in that. But those deep conversations are really, really important. And going through life review, looking at pictures, telling stories, and certainly at the very end, my favorite thing is what I call a living wake. As a person declines more and more and becomes unresponsive, to have the loved ones around the bed and remembering times with their loved one, sharing stories and laughter, tears, and really surrounding that person in love. Whether they can participate, the client can participate or not, they feel the love and often hear the words too.
So you're really there for the family as much as the terminally ill patient. And is it true that after that person has died, you are there to help the family with their grief, correct?
Very much so, yeah. That grief journey starts long before the person passes. It starts as they're realizing that that's coming. For a chronic illness, it's a little more subtle. For a terminal, it's the day you get that diagnosis. So we start working on the grief journey right then and there and creating remembrances and helping every person in that intimate circle with that. And then after the person does die, and then to meet with those family members or loved ones to help remember what happened, because it's not unusual when you've been a caregiver for someone you love to have terrible fears that you didn't handle it as well as you should have. I should have, I could have, if only. And if I'm there to walk with them, then in the bereavement period, I can say, no, let's talk about it. Remember this event. Let's talk about what happened and how beautifully you handled it, or that you did call the hospice team and they recommended this, and you can really provide beautiful support. And that goes on for as long as the loved ones need it. This is not a lifelong relationship unless they choose it to be that way. This is a temporary time, and so to be there for as long as they need me, and then we let it go until they reach out to me again.
So walk us through how you might help individuals or families record those memories that you were talking about, or help families remember their loved ones, or help a dying patient bring up those memories that they want to talk about and discuss with their loved ones before they pass. Walk me through that.
Well, I am an author and teach reflective writing. I always try to encourage journaling for people, letter writing, some sort of writing. There's a true healing that comes from taking what's in our heart and putting it out on paper. And I always help if that's what they choose to do. But there are many other ways, too. You can create little altars for someone that loved hiking or loved nature above anything else. You can create little altars in the space, where family can go out and gather some things from outdoors and bring them in, and then share that with the person and talk about their memories together. Always photos, video memories are really wonderful. I have a client that created a photo memory about a child that was lost, and that it created a chance to talk about it and remember and to bring it back into the living again, which is really vital. Music can be done, creating songs that were meaningful to people. There are lots of different ways, depending upon the personality of each family or loved one and the client, too.
I feel like it would be a little more challenging if you're dealing with a patient who is suffering from some kind of dementia or memory loss. How do you work around that?
Well, that person has usually strong emotional memory. They're not able to share it with us. They gradually leave our reality and are living in a different reality that needs to be supported. So in that time, you always want to support the loved ones that are gradually losing, contact with a living person that is no longer present to them. But in those ways, you can do a lot of tactile things. When you have a clue about the things that were important to that person, music is a huge emotional memory, taste, smell, sense. This was not a client of mine, but I saw this on one of my websites that I go to, where a woman had been a ballet dancer, and a very famous one, and completely lost in her dementia. And all she had to do was hear the Swan Lake, and she started making the movements to it again. It was just profound. And again,
wow.
Those are very inspirational things, and a way to remember to reach those, people who have dementia. They're not gone. They're just not with us. And I always try to explain to family that they feel your love, even if they don't remember the person, and they need to have that touch and those words and memories shared with them, and let them do whatever they need to do with that information.
Something we have to talk about in early 2021 is the last year and the COVID-19 pandemic. How has that affected your profession? Are people still seeking out end-of-life doulas, and can you actually help someone virtually?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, I've been doing more and more virtual, not completely virtual for clients, but for the loved ones. In that way, sometimes it's easier for family members, adult children. There's often a lot of emotional siloing going on in different opinions about how things should be handled. And so if you can talk to people with a Zoom call or a phone call, can really help them through that and to honor their feelings. And because loved ones have been asked to pass alone, end-of-life doulas have really been utilized more than they have been in the past. Hopefully that will translate into more in person again too. But there is a way to reach us, you know what I mean? We have the skills, and some facilities let me come in, others don't, but they can set up Zoom calls for me, and we can work together and do some of this work virtually rather than leave people without any support.
Margie, what inspired you to do this kind of work?
Well, I've always been a very spiritual person since the day I was born, but in the early 90s I went through a real spiritual awakening and really started to see the interconnectedness of life and the energy and all of that. That's how I found hospice, because I could no longer go back into the role I was using or working as a nurse prior to that. And hospice really, and especially working with people at end of life, because they're right there, that inner self. And they're primed for the spiritual, emotional, and physical support. And so that really paved my way. I loved hospice, and yet it wasn't exactly the role for me. It is a role that's very, very necessary, and I completely applaud it. But for me to finally be able to step out and to just hold that space for people was really my greatest joy, and to honor the sacredness of the life that was lived, and to help draw out that life review and life closure, and to help the loved ones to share deeply. That's really my greatest joy. And so it was just a process of finding the right steps towards what I'm doing right now.
And you've been an end-of-life doula for 6 years now, and in the intro I mentioned that there are about 400 certified end-of-life doulas in the whole country. How would a person find a doula and find a doula that's a good fit for their situations?
My first place that I would recommend is to go to the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance.org. You have to spell it out for some reason, otherwise you get a different website. That is our competency platform. There is a code of ethics. There's all of the statutes that we're supposed to adhere to, and there's a doula directory for every state. And people have websites that you can contact. Otherwise, to just Google in your area, but I do think that to have some competency assurance is important, and that's where the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance does have a competency badge that is part of the hospice and palliative care program, and it is recognized as showing that people have achieved the competency and that they can be assured. After that, you need to contact the doula. This can be done virtually very easily, or a phone call, and find the right fit, because there's different personalities, different focuses. For me, I'm deeply spiritual. That's always my first place to go. That doesn't mean I don't do the rest. Others are more about helping plan remembrances and funerals and things like that. So you have to talk to people and find out who they are, and it's just really what's the right fit.
Somewhat of an interview process, asking the right questions for your particular needs.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. You mentioned, Margie, that you wrote a few books, and one of them I saw was called Sally, a memoir. Is that a book about your mom?
It is, yeah. I have always written and wanted to be an author, but never could quite find the right story. And so as I journaled through my mother's hospice journey and final death, I recognized, I thought, okay, here's my story. And so I took those journal entries and used them to create a memoir, and then certainly created chapters, in prose beyond that.
What about for your end-of-life journey, Margie? Do you think that it's changed the way that you're going to look at your journey and how you look at or will approach the end of your own life?
Absolutely, yeah. I always have been, I'm a Reiki master, and I have many friends that have intuitive gifts, and I've made sure that my adult children understand that, when my time comes, that there's a certain intimate circle that I will need there to nourish me, in addition to the medical care and things like that. And I've created, stories of how I would like to see it all happen, that sacred environment that I'm talking about. My adult children are my power of attorney, and so they know that certainly I want to have medical care, but this is the limit. After that, I'm not afraid to go. Let's go for comfort measures when it makes sense, things like that. So it's really important to use our knowledge and to keep. Our end-of-life plan should be a work in progress. We keep growing and changing and finding new ways to view things, and it should be an ongoing conversation.
We talked about terminally ill patients and patients who have a diagnosis and are journeying but still have some time. Are you ever able to help people who have lost a loved one through a sudden death, unexpected death?
Oh, yeah. I think I think that is just the hardest thing. Yes, absolutely. And there are some end-of-life doulas that focus only on that. I know someone, I don't think she's practicing anymore, but she said every person in her family, she had deaths from car accidents and several friends and family members that had suicides. And she said it was always or heart attacks. She said it was going to the emergency room in this trauma and then leaving alone and no one to support me. So she went into that work as her main focus. And I certainly am available for that. That is a whole grief that goes way beyond, and the trauma that comes from those sudden events like that need to be tenderly cared for and make sure that the trauma is dealt with appropriately.
Mm-hmm. What do you think that families appreciate most that you do for them, Margie?
I think the calm, the peaceful atmosphere that I create, that's just part of my personal energy pretty much, but to really make sure that I allow deep conversations. I don't have to fill every moment with the chatter. My recent client that passed, the final words that were spoken to me were, "You need to do this work, Margie, because you were able to hold the space for me to really be honest with myself to the core and get prepared to release into the next reality." So things like that. Those, like I said, I'm deeply spiritual, and so that's, I think, where people find the greatest benefit. And they appreciate the rest of it too, but that's really what it's about.
Right. So we are in the middle of a Remembering a Life podcast. Who are you remembering today, Margie?
Two people. Just 2 years ago, first my 97-year-old father passed in February, which was not sad. It was a joy to see him finally released. Never mind that we all miss him, but it was appropriate and a beautiful passing. But very soon after, just 6 weeks later, in fact, my brother, who was younger than me, was diagnosed with a brain tumor and passed about 6 weeks after that. So it was right during this time of year, so they're both very present on my mind.
I am sorry for your losses.
Yeah.
I would imagine you were a great comfort to them and to your family during this time. And what a beautiful profession and calling during truly the most difficult time in a person's life, in a family's life, and helping them to get through that chaotic, anxiety-filled time in their life. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I love it. It's truly a calling and a joy. So thank you.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, truly, and thank you.
Mm-hmm. And thank you all for joining us today. For more information about end-of-life doulas and a list of questions you may want to ask to determine if a doula is a good fit for you, visit rememberingalife.com. To read Margie's blog post on this topic, visit rememberingalife.com/blog.